Hello, everyone, and welcome to the UDOS podcast. This is the podcast where we talk about things that you may not know enough about. And today I'm joined by Moise.
Hi everyone.
So, we're going to talk about our neighbors, our more affluent neighbor, which is Singapore. So, Singapore is a pretty unique country for a lot of different reasons. Food is not the reason why they're unique, that's us, never them. But we're going to talk about
That's
something different that makes them much more unique than us. Something that goes under the radar more often than not, but it contributes to a lot of the reasons why Singapore does very well socioeconomically. And we're going to talk about Singapore's public housing. But first, what is public housing? So, public housing is basically any property that the government owns. So, this could be a local government meaning the state. For example, like Negeri Sembilan owns a property, or the federal government, that means like Wilayah Persekutuan owns that property. So public housing could be whether the local government or the federal government owns it. So what we're going to talk about first is we're going to bring a bit of historical context into what Singapore's housing looked like before this, and then we're going to talk about how Singapore implemented various policies to make it what it looked like today. So let's talk about a couple of problems that public housing may have attached to it and things like that. So whenever people talk about public housing, right, there's a lot of negative connotations to it. So people talk about public housing as being just a bunch of houses, a bunch of building blocks put together in a row. That there's a lot of crime in these areas. That there's a lot of issues with affordability, the quality of it, or how many public houses exist. So this is like the Bermuda Triangle of why people won't go into public housings, whether it's affordable enough, whether the quality is good enough, or whether there are enough public housings that are available for people on the ground. So when you talk about public housing, maybe in Malaysia, there are mixed opinions about it. In other countries, there are really negative opinions about it. But we're going to talk about how Singapore did a public housing masterclass. So Moise, give us this historical context on what was going on.
Right. So I like how you start by introducing the common grounds that we have. Even though we win in terms of food, we also share the common history which leads Singapore to become our long lost brother or our neighbor now in status quo. But it all comes down to our shared history and how we branched off to become what is now Malaysia and what is now Singapore, two vastly different things that perhaps decades ago we couldn't actually see how we could have drifted so far away from each other. So I think the first thing I want to talk about would be the pre-independence for Singapore. This like the time when the British were still here. So when the British were still here, here being Singapore, not Malaysia, or both, common history. So there was a Singapore Improvement Trust, which was made by the British to solve the problem of overcrowding, because ultimately Singapore is a very small like place. You have a lot of people there, but there's just not enough land to go around. So if you want to go capitalistic in this thing, then like it's almost guaranteed that a large majority of individuals be disenfranchised and just tossed away in favor of the small rich individuals. So the Singapore Improvement Trust was made by the British. But the problem was like during this time when the British were here, there was already existing conflicts internationally with the British and Japan primarily, which led to Japan bombings in Singapore, which destroyed many of these houses. So because of this, a lot of people didn't prefer public housing, not purely because it is like not good enough, but mostly because of the affiliation that it has with like the British, and there is a negative connotation that exists upon it. Lah. Again, I could be wrong, but this is, I think, generally the line of thinking that people had during those times. So in this instance, not a lot of people favored public housing, primarily because public housing wasn't like all around. It wasn't good enough. It didn't have the greatest idea behind it. So what happened to public housing like after the independence when we didn't have the label of we being Singapore, when Singapore didn't have the label of being under British rule anymore, like after post, like during post independence. So post independence, we had the People's Action Party, which was the government at the time, and they created the Housing and Development Board, also known as the HDB. So this board like was continued from an existing board, but it was given a blank slate to increase the priority of housing so that Singaporeans were able to be given this right to home and shelter. So this new board that was created by the People's Action Party were given primarily four missions or four things that they were given. The first one is the fact that they were given a high degree of freedom, and the second being they had a very high budget. So what they did was basically they like decided what they want to buy, the lands they want to buy, and what they want to occupy. Everything is up to their jurisdiction. The third thing was the fact that now the HDB does not need to obey to ordinance laws. So what are ordinance laws? Ordinance laws are laws that are passed by a municipal government. So basically, like the local government or local
Mm.
state, town, or village in that instance, that usually has some kind of political subdivision to the state. But in this instance, after the independence, then there was no need for this anymore, and it was entirely up to the People's Action Party. So I think primarily the reasoning was that they could operate without the approval of other departments, primarily because like post independence there were still many racial issues among the multicultural like existing cultures in Singapore at the time. So there was the systems that it was trying to build up towards this more open and more allowing for everyone to have housing, but ultimately there were still problems that were facing at that point. So to understand more of the specific steps that were taken by the People's Action Party. Maybe Vishnu, you can explain more on what the Housing and Development Board actually did.
So the one thing that we need to keep in mind throughout this whole time is the freedom and the autonomy that the HDB was given. So because they had all of this autonomy, right, the HDB did a couple of things. The main goal was to just build as much as fast as possible. They wanted to just put as many buildings available. So to do this, you can't build like the most affluent or the most complex uh, housing structures, right? So when they build a lot of structures, they build a lot of single roomed houses with like the minimum necessities, maybe like a bit of electrical supply, one or two taps. That's what we're looking at. And what they also did was they wanted to occupy as much land as possible and put it under the HDB's autonomy. So, how did they acquire this land? So, there were a bunch of laws that they used in order to seize and acquire all these lands. So, one of them was like the fireside provision. Now, either from your racial tensions or from the war, you had areas that were just cleared by fires. So, the fire burned down everything. So what the HDB saw was an opportunity to seize that land. So wherever the fire had occurred and like ravage those lands, HDB will seize those lands and then they like build all over it with new infrastructure for people to stay. And then second is the laws were very sneaky because usually you have landowners for all of these lands, right? But what the HDB did was they use the laws as such that they don't need to pay any compensation to the landowners. So whoever owned the lands, they basically got screwed. So this was important because if they had to like pay compensation to the landowners, then it reduces the efficiency of like building as much as fast as possible. So you can see this is kind of sneaky and quite cunning, but it's what the government wanted to do to be as efficient as possible. We'll talk a little bit about authoritarianism later and how Singapore's related to it. Another like act that they had was the Land Acquisition Act. So this HDB was like, if there's any land that we determine to be for public use, we're going to take that land. So all they needed to do was just legally frame or propagate the message that land A, B, C is for public purpose, and then they can just seize it, right? And again, the landowners, other than not being able to get any compensation, they weren't given a platform to object or they couldn't like fight back for their cases because this government is very, very authoritarian in that sense, where they just seize land and then they made it their own. The government also fought with the environment. So basically, like if you don't know or you should know, Singapore is surrounded by the sea, right? So what Singapore has done for a lot of its independence is reclaimed a lot of land from the sea. And whenever they reclaim that land falls under the sovereignty of the state or it becomes the autonomy of the local or the federal government. So from all of these initiatives, like I think just now was a single digit percentage of how much land the government owned or how much public housing the government owned. Now it's about like 94 to 95%. So almost all the public housing or all the land that existed in Singapore was under the government's control. So this is how they're able to spread as fast and wide as possible, being a bit cunning but using their power as much as possible. So Muiz, what do things look like now?
Right. So from general observation of today's present or status quo, we can see how much the effect of what history has done to Singapore. The fact that the government was able to utilize their power to basically manhandle their way to own every part of the land to the extent that they own 94% of it really showed the way that the government now in present have the ability to do whatever they want with that land. And right now, because they chose to build a lot of housing, because there were a lot of Singaporeans and they just needed like homes for these people, then we have more than 1 million public flats in 24 new towns as of status quo. The fact that the government made all of these houses and they also like made these houses with specific intentions in mind. I think the first intention or the first idea that they committed to was the idea that each town is designed to self-contain to about 100,000 to 200,000 people in their own local communities. Local communities being that they are close to stores, they are close to malls, they are close to schools, and these things indicate that in your own small community, you are able to socially engineer the kinds of things that people in that community are going to do. And another effort of social engineering in terms of this town designing that they did was allow for easier transportation like the MRT and the LRT systems. Like cars aren't as prioritized in Singapore compared to many other countries in the world, primarily because of the small um, space that they have, but also because of the fact that this was designed by the government to become like that. Now, in order to accommodate all of this new housing for a larger increase of population, they don't have multiple high-rise buildings in one place, but rather Singapore distributed it like across Singapore so that people can freely like see the Singapore as something that they own. This is an effort to decrease the economic disparage between the people so that everyone can feel that Singapore is one place for everyone. This means that everyone feels a sense of belonging and they're less likely to vandalize this community or this home that is essentially now where they're going to live for their own lives, for their own generations to come. And because Singapore isn't as they don't have much land. Most of these are like very high rise apartment buildings. But the thing that was most important was the fact that communal places are usually reserved as first floors where everyone can access, where you don't necessarily need privacy in those areas. So in these buildings, the first floors are usually reserved for special events, for weddings, for things that you can do as a community as opposed to individualism. So you don't usually see housing on lower floors or floors that other people can have access to. So that's usually how, or that was how Singapore engineered its housing systems. But we know that people have different needs according to different status that they have for their families. For example, some families have many children, some families don't have many children. So, in that instance, there is an increasing diversity in the kinds of housing as well as the rooms that are made in these houses. So, maybe you can have low cost one room buildings or one room apartments, or you can have high cost 5 room units, or maybe even executive condos fitting for what the people need at the time, as well as how it continues to go forward in terms of the outlook. So this all seems very like utopian. It seems like very nice. Singapore has done a very good job in allowing for the community to become one, prevent social discourse, allow for the people to get what they need rather than what they want. And these things all indicate that there must be some kind of cash behind it. Like in most circumstances, the government is likely to help the people. But sometimes the government holding so much power also means that like especially in this circumstance, that although residents are free to buy and sell and rent properties, like the ownership is always under the government on a 99-year lease, which also means that the government can really do whatever they want with it going forward. So going back to how the government is actually social engineering the people right now is the fact that the arrangement of these units, the fact that in one floor you can have many different size units. This is to promote the social cohesion, to facilitate people to act a certain way. It doesn't matter if you're Chinese in Singapore, it doesn't matter if you're Malay, if you're Indian, whether your income group is what and where you come from. All of this is like to promote the social cohesion between these income groups. So it all sounds nice, but ultimately there are always some controversies. There are always some underlying problems that exist within these kinds of systems. Like maybe Vishnu, you can explain more about this. But ultimately, the conclusion here is the fact that Singapore was able to do that because they were able to muscle around in history and take that land for themselves in the beginning. This is Singapore's unique brand of authoritarianism, and maybe we can have a debate in the future whether this form of authoritarianism is good or whether like the government should release more of its control on the land and allow for the people to have their say in that. But ultimately, that is a debate for another time. So Vishnu, maybe you can explain some of the more controversies behind Singapore.
Yeah, we might do another podcast session about that because there's a lot going on there. But basically, the controversy that exists is how the Singapore government has just too much control if you think about it. Like right now, the reason why there is less backlash to it, I would say, maybe that's the right term, is because Singapore is doing so well economically, right? Like everybody is prosperous more often than not, a better job opportunity, a very good education system, right? Like these are the benefits. There are reasons why there's little backlash towards this government. Like if you were to put the
Mm.
Singapore government in a recession, then I think the amount of backlash that this government has is significantly greater. But also, like remember Moise talked just now about like how the housing has like a percentage for like different race demographics to like promote unity and stuff. You did talk about that, right, Moise?
Somewhat, yes.
Yeah.
Maybe
Okay.
it wasn't
Cool.
that clear, but I guess it works. Yeah.
So basically, like you have requirements or quotas for the housing for each race demograph. So the problem that exists in Singapore is it's a very sensitive topic, and any backlash about these topics is very difficult to maneuver, and the government will immediately like clamp you down. So if anybody wants to talk about like public housing not being accessible enough for another race because people may like sell off their land or rent off to other individuals, that conversation becomes so much more complicated, and the government doesn't even allow you to have those conversations. So as much as things are going on well right now, but if the incentives for people to like rent their land to other individuals or to sell their land to other individuals exist, and the government is constantly preventing you from having those conversations, this is where Singapore might lead to its downfall. For now, things are going great, but we'll see what happens in the future.
Yep. And we hope that everything can stay as in status quo. That would be the best for everyone. But ultimately, the world doesn't care, much like we've seen in recent history. But that's all from us, I believe. Vishnu, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I'm good. I think we may talk about Singapore again. Singapore's quite an interesting topic, to be honest. There's a lot of things going on about there. Yeah, we'll definitely cover it in the future. So yeah, there you have it. This is the podcast session where we talked about public Singapore's public housing and how they've made this like an absolute masterclass. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel, put any comments down below. Our reference for this fact sheet for this podcast session will be in the description. Follow all our socials, and yeah, see you next time.